The sun mercilessly punished the streets of Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, as President Ibrahim looked out the window of his presidential office, the 42nd. A Agilous heat was typical for that time of year, but today it seemed even more intense, as if nature itself sensed the importance of what was about to happen. "Mr. President, the American delegation has arrived at the airport," informed Moussa Dio, his chief of staff, a middle-aged man with eyes that carried the wisdom of someone who had seen many international agreements fail. Adjusted his traditional Burkina attire, took a deep breath, and nodded. "Prepare the conference room. I want everything to be impeccable." At Ouagadougou International Airport, a private jet landed elegantly on the runway. From inside the aircraft emerged International, with his impeccably tailored Italian suit, gold-rimmed glasses, and rehearsed smile. Goldstein represented everything Western capitalism had to offer. "Welcome to Burkina Faso." Mr. Goldstein greeted the Minister of Mines and Resources, Amadou Konade. "Thank you for the warm welcome," replied Goldstein, discreetly wiping sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief. "I'm eager to finalize this agreement that will transform the future of our countries." In the conference room of the presidential palace, the tension was palpable. Goldstein's proposal was tempting: an initial investment of $5 billion to explore the newly discovered gold mines in Tembao, in the north of the country. For a nation with an annual GDP of only $17 billion, the deal seemed like an economic miracle. "President Traoré, this agreement represents a unique opportunity," explained Goldstein, as his assistants distributed copies of the 300-page contract. "My company will bring cutting-edge technology, create thousands of jobs, and build infrastructure that will benefit the entire country." Traoré, a century-year-old military man who had assumed the presidency after a coup d'etat against a government he considered corrupt and subservient to foreign interests, remained impassive, his eyes penetrating and analytical, studied the man before him. "Mr. Goldstein, I appreciate your proposal. Burkina Faso needs investments, but it also needs to protect its sovereignty and ensure that our resources primarily benefit our people." Traoré responded firmly. Goldstein smiled, revealing perfectly aligned teeth. "Of course, President, this agreement has been structured to be mutually beneficial. I suggest your experts analyze it overnight, and tomorrow we can proceed with assigning my." After the meeting, as the American delegation withdrew to the luxurious Aminata Sano, a young and brilliant lawyer educated at Harvard who had returned to her native country to contribute to its development. "I want you to analyze every comma in this contract," ordered Traoré, handing out the copies. "I will not sign anything that compromises the future of our people." That night, as the city fell asleep under a starry sky, Aminata worked tirelessly in her makeshift office at the presidential palace. Her eyes burned with fatigue. When she reached page 213 of the contract, suddenly she straightened in her chair, rereading the paragraph 3 times to make sure she had understood correctly. "My God," she murmured, picking up the phone. "Mr. President, I need to see you immediately. I found something." "You need to see the clock marked 2:37 a.m." When Aminata Sanogo hurriedly entered the presidential office, Ibrahim Traoré, still dressed in his formal attire, seemed not to have slept. Maps of Burkina Faso's mining regions were spread across his desk, along with economic reports and development projections. "What did you find?" 47 subsection C. She placed the open contract on the desk, pointing to a seemingly innocuous paragraph. Written in a smaller font than the rest of the document, this clause, disguised as an operational continuity guarantee, grants Goldstein Resources exclusive rights over all discovered mines for 50 years, with the possibility of automatic renewal. For another 25. Traoré adjusted his reading glasses and examined the text. His face. The clause also establishes that any dispute will be resolved in arbitration tribunals in New York under American laws, and most seriously, Burkina Faso waives any right to nationalize or renegotiate the terms, even in case of national emergency. The president slowly rose, walking to the window. The horizon of Ouagadougou was beginning to brighten with the first rays of sunlight. "They think we are fools," he finally said, his voice low but laden with indignation, "or desperate enough to sell our future." There are more problematic clauses scattered throughout the contract, added Aminata, but this is the most serious. It's deliberately hidden among technical terms and cross-references to other annexes. Traoré turned his gaze determined, convened the Council of Ministers for an emergency meeting at 6 a.m. and prepare a complete dossier on all these abusive clauses. Meanwhile, at the Leo Waga 2000 Hotel, Maxwell Goldstein savored his breakfast. On the terrace overlooking the city beside him, Richard Palmer, his chief counsel, reviewed notes for the signing ceremony. Everything is ready. Max commented. Palmer, the Burkina are so desperate for investments that they'll barely read the minor clauses. In 6 months, we'll have total control over the largest gold reserves in West Africa. Goldstein smiled, observing the city that would soon be, in his words, just another asset in his portfolio. These African countries are all the same, Richard. Their leaders talk about sovereignty and national pride, but in the end, they all have their price at 9 o'clock a.m. When the American delegation arrived at the presidential palace for the signing ceremony, they were surprised by the presence of not only the complete cabinet, but also local journalists and international correspondents. "What's going on?" whispered Palmer to Goldstein. This wasn't on the program. True entered the room accompanied by Aminata and a team of advisors. His countenance was grave, but determined. "Mr. Goldstein," the president began, "before we proceed, I would like to discuss some peculiarities of your contract." Goldstein maintained his rehearsed smile. "Of course, President. True, we are open to clarifying any doubts." True took a copy of the contract, opening it directly to page 213, perhaps. "You could explain to those present, including our friends from the press, the meaning of this specific clause." Goldstein's smile faltered for an instant. His eyes met Palmer's, who subtly shook his head in negation. "President Traoré, contracts of this complexity naturally contain safeguards to protect the investment. I suggest we discuss any concerns in private, as is customary in negotiations of this nature." "There is nothing to discuss in private when it comes to the future of my country," replied Traoré, his voice echoing through the room. "This clause, skillfully hidden in your 300-page contract, essentially hands over control of our natural resources to your company for 75 years. With minimal compensation for our people." A murmur ran through the room as journalists frantically took notes. "That is an exaggerated interpretation," intervened Palmer, "trying to control the damage. We are offering billions in direct investments." "Let me be clear," continued Traoré, ignoring the interruption. "Burkina Faso is not for sale. Our gold is not for sale, and certainly our dignity is not for sale." At the conference room of the presidential palace, True, firm and resolute, supported by his cabinet and the brilliant lawyer Aminata Sanogo, on the other Maxwell Goldstein and his team of executives and lawyers, visibly uncomfortable with the unexpected turn of events. "Mr. President, with all due respect, you are putting at risk a transformative investment for your country," argued Goldstein, abandoning his previous cordial tone. $5 billion don't come along every day for a nation like Burkina Faso. Trump remained impassive. "And how much is our sovereignty worth, Mr. Goldstein? How much is the future of our children and grandchildren worth?" With a gesture, the president signaled to Aminata, who projected a detailed graph on the main screen. "According to our conservative estimates, $5 billion would represent less than 8% of that value, while the clause on page 213 would guarantee your company more than 80% of the profits for the next 50 years. The journalist present recorded every word while cameras captured Goldstein's increasingly tense expression. "Furthermore," continued Traoré, "we discovered 17 other problematic clauses scattered throughout the contract. Burkina Faso's right to regulate its own monetary policies related to gold." Richard Palmer, Goldstein's chief counsel, tried to intervene. "These are standard practices in international mining contracts. All major investors require similar guarantees. And that is exactly why Africa remains poor while its resources enrich foreign corporations," retorted Traoré. "This cycle of exploitation ends today, at least in Burkina Faso." The president then rose, walking to a side table where the original contract was laid out with a deliberate gesture. He took the 300-page document and tore it in half in front of the cameras and the astonished gazes of those present. "The negotiations are over," he declared. "Mr. Goldstein, you and your delegation have 24 hours to leave Burkina Faso." A sepulchral silence took over the room, broken only by the click of photographic cameras. Goldstein, his face red with contained fury, rose abruptly. "You have just committed the biggest mistake of your life, President Traoré," he said in a low voice but audible enough to be captured by the microphones. "No serious investor will consider your country again after this." "I prefer a poor and sovereign country to a rich and enslaved one," replied Traoré, sustaining the billionaire's gaze as the American delegation hastily withdrew. Traoré addressed the journalists present directly from today. Burkina Faso will adopt a new approach to its natural resources. We will invite investors who respect our sovereignty and are willing to establish genuinely equitable partnerships in the following hours. The news spread like wildfire across the African continent and beyond. Videos of the moment when Traoré tore up the contract went viral on social media, generating a wave of popular support in Burkina Faso and other African countries. In New York, however, the reaction was quite different at Goldstein Resources headquarters. An emergency meeting of the administrative board discussed retaliation strategies. "We need to destroy his credibility," vociferated Goldstein, pacing back and forth in his conference room on the 78th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper. "Activate our contacts in the media, in think tanks, in the State Department. I want Traoré to be portrayed as an unstable dictator who represents a threat to Western interests." Sarah Chen, one of the company's youngest directors, dared to disagree. "Max, perhaps we should reconsider our approach. Public opinion is clearly on his side. Maybe a more balanced agreement." "Balanced," interrupted Goldstein, hitting the table. "You think I built this empire by being balanced? Africa is the last great unexplored territory. If we start giving in now, all these countries will want to renegotiate. We cannot allow to become an example." Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré faced his own challenges in his office. He met with his closest ministers to discuss the next steps. "Reprisals will come quickly," warned the Minister of Foreign Affairs. "Gold has powerful connections. We must prepare for diplomatic, economic, and media pressures." Aminata, who had been invited to the meeting, offered a different perspective. "Mr. President, this is also a moment of opportunity. The world is watching. We can use this platform to propose a new model of international cooperation." Traoré nodded, thoughtful. "Prepare a speech for tomorrow. I will speak directly to the Burkina people and to the world. It's time to show that there is a different path." That night, as the city buzzed with rumors and debates about the historic confrontation, Traoré remained in his office, contemplating the map of his country hanging on the wall. The mineruric regions were highlighted in red: gold, manganese, zinc, copper riches that for centuries had been more of a curse than a blessing for his people.